When we have any reason whatsoever to think that intervening with somebody or in the street dynamic would prevent violence, we can, in principle, do a custom notification. And that is really the whole framework. As everybody here has heard me say all the time, the ceasefire framework is in principle very straightforward. We know who's doing what out there. We are going to identify them. We're going to let them know that they've been identified. We are going to deliver these core messages to them, and we are then going to back up the promises we make. Custom notifications are a way of taking that to whomever we want, whenever we want. We do not have separate science on this yet. We do not have independent evaluations yet of this approach. That will come, but we're early enough in breaking this out broadly into the field that we don't have that yet. What we do have is a consistent record of really extraordinary impact on the street. And that experience goes back to the beginning of ceasefire. We weren't really that conscious about it at the time, but we actually did this nearly from the beginning in Boston. So after it was pretty routine for the gang unit or probation officers or the street workers to bring to the group, there's about to be trouble. And we would look around the table and simply say to each other, okay, who knows somebody in that particular street crew? And somebody always did. And from the beginning, we were sending police officers, outreach workers, different people out to talk to those people. And the message was the ceasefire message. And we know who you are. We've got reason to think something's coming. Don't do it. And it nearly always worked. And we rather stupidly lost sight of that as the years went by and as we became more focused on really structuring and scripting the overall strategy, that more or less fell by the wayside. A couple of years ago, we returned to it. We went through a lot of work nationally to figure out how to make this happen and routinize it. It began being done in a couple of jurisdictions now 3 or 4 years ago, and that has now gotten us to this point where we really do think we know how to do it. And in the places where it has been piloted, it seems to have been really dramatically effective. And Chris, who's probably done more of these than anybody at this point, has been driving this in Chicago, and we'll speak to their experience with that after we go through the basics, which I'm going to cover. So if we think of this as a 1-2, if the call-ins are a way of blanketing the hot neighborhoods with the core intervention, then custom notifications are a way of reinforcing that, of addressing the inevitable places and people where the overall message has not taken hold or has not taken hold completely. And between the two, it begins to feel like we can reset things in a pretty fundamental way across the neighborhoods, as we've always known we could do, and now manage it in nearly real time. And between the two of those things, we are feeling very, very positive about that package. So we've touched on this already. The main way in which we think about custom notifications is that they should be directed at the impact players. And there are going to be times when that's not right, when whoever is acting out is not an impact player, or when the way we have to reach the right part of the network is through people we know who are not impact players. So none of this is totally prescriptive, but most of the time it's turning out that we want to speak to that 10 or 20% of the core street population who are the shooters, the instigators, the people who keep the beefs going, all that kind of thing. And once you get your head around this, all of this is pretty obvious, but the fact is we can do this with anybody we want. We can do them very, very quickly. High Point, which is, as usual, moving very quickly and modeling this for the rest of us, as they often have, has what they call an intelligence unit now. It's a new piece of the police department. It's staffed at a level of, I think, 5 or 6 people. And basically what it does is vacuum up intelligence of all kinds, from crime reports, from incident reports, from Crime Stoppers, from other kinds of community input, from street intelligence, from the rank and file, just anything that they think is meaningful. And they are looking for opportunities to head things off by going out and conducting these custom notifications. And they're at a point now that if they get some reason to believe that there's going to be retaliation and they hear it in the morning, or they hear that somebody's thinking about doing a robbery in the morning, they are conducting custom notifications that afternoon. And their understanding, their sort of reporting to us, is that they really are able to manage all of this in nearly real time. We have examples of this in which police do it alone. In Cincinnati, they did it for quite a while with police officers joined up with ATF officers. We have some examples in which law enforcement gives community partners the names of people that they want reached, and the community partners do it alone or do it first and then broker a meeting between the impact player and law enforcement. We think that the ideal way most of the time is to do it with a law enforcement figure and a community figure, and to, as we do in the call-ins, divide the basic messages between law enforcement and the community. In this case, the community figure would deliver both the moral voice message and the outreach and support message. As I say, we do not have independent science on this yet, but our feel is that that's the most effective way to do it. And we know that working from theory and wanting to drive home the fact that this is legitimate, that the community and law enforcement are working together in a new way, that modeling that by doing this together is probably the right way to do it. We have a very strong feeling that when the notification can take place with what we all call influentials, people close to the impact player who are already a positive influence on them, that reinforces the impact. We have, and Chris will speak to this, we have some fairly good reason to believe that when we can't find the impact player, that conducting the notification only with the influential and saying, we're really trying to keep your son, grandson alive and out of prison, will you find him and make sure he understands all of this, is also very effective. And because we're talking about, in every instance now, one person whose name we know, it means that we can really customize what we're saying to his situation, both what he and perhaps his family wants and needs in terms of outreach and support, and in terms of his individual legal situation. And we will speak to both of those things going forward. And then there are this cluster of situations beefs, retaliation, local spikes, all that sort of thing that we regularly encounter, for which this approach seems just tailor-made. So all of you in your departments, I'm quite sure, are already doing this. You are already identifying that small number of impact players. But just to be clear about it, there are multiple ways in which we see people doing this. They all work. Doing all of them is probably a good idea, but in practice, it just isn't difficult to single out those core folks. And remember here, we are not at this stage talking about legal standards or making cases or even focusing enforcement. So this is not a statutory process. This is not about probable cause. This is really a common sense intelligence function. And the question is, who is driving things out there? And frontline people know that. Frontline people in other agencies know that. You can ask CIs. I hate it when people read the bullet points off PowerPoint, so I'll stop there. But all of these mechanisms can be very powerful. The one I will spend a little bit more time on is that we are finding formal social network analysis very helpful. We've talked about this in other contexts when one can build link analysis from usually police department information, usually arrested with and stopped with databases. Then one gets behaviorally defined connections between people. And when we look at the network diagrams that result from that, it's very easy to look at those and say, right, we want to get a message out to this group. Which individual, based on what we know about this group, has the most connections to the most people? So if we're wanting to deliver a message to a group, it's going to be the most efficient to go talk to him and say, as part of that, make sure everybody you run with, here's what we're about to tell you. Andrew Papachristos, who's working with all of you, has found that when you have the kinds of groupings that social network analysis always produces, and you have, for example, just one person who is the link between 2 or 3 of these larger clusters, that those people are at extremely high risk for some reason. We don't quite understand the mechanism yet, but it's very, very clear from his analysis that those people are subjected to violent victimization at exceptionally high levels. So when we know that, we can try to intervene. From Andrew's work, we also know that when somebody has been killed or shot and wounded, that the people around that victim are for a while at greatly elevated risk. And so those all become opportunities to use custom notifications to intervene. So this art form that we're calling a custom legal assessment is a very important piece of this process. So when we are in fact talking to one person whose name we know, it means that we can look at their individual criminal record. Usually prosecutors, but other people can do this as well if they've got the background, can look at that record, can summarize it for the person, and can say to them, based on this record, you need to understand that you face exactly the following legal exposure for carrying a gun, firing into a dwelling, committing your next violent felony, the cluster of core things that we most want them not to do. And Chris has some very interesting stories about presenting this information to people in Chicago, and will tell us about that. But what we know both from a long line of criminological research and also from all of our everyday experience is that people often don't even know what their individual record is. They've forgotten, or they never really understood it in the first place for all kinds of reasons. They do not know frequently what the law is, and they don't know what their exposure is. They know what they're used to. They know what their friends have gotten. They don't know what the law permits, and they can't even in principle know, for example, that people are sitting at the U.S. Attorney's Office talking about them by name. And informing them of that turns out to be very, very powerful. One of our data points on this is Chicago PSN. So the work that Tracy and Andrew piloted in Chicago, which singles out parolees with gun priors, puts them through a notification as part of their release process. In that protocol, the only enforcement piece is that they are told that because they are by definition felons, they are exposed to the federal firearms law, they are prohibited persons, and the lowest gun sentence they could get if they violate that federal law is a 5-year mandatory minimum. That's it. There's no follow-up, there's no special enforcement attention. It is only telling them that. And Tracy and Andrew know from their now very long, meticulous evaluation of that intervention that it is dramatically effective. So we really know that this works, and we know that it's really important. So again, you've heard about this in lots and lots of our other conversations, but this term influential we coined to label the people that nearly all of these guys have, who care about them, who they know care about them, and who represent a push in the right direction in their lives. And the theory here is not very fancy, but the idea is that if those people know that the impact player is headed for trouble, that they will try to do something about it, that they will validate the law enforcement message, that they will help push them toward services, and that when the guy knows that this person knows, that he is more likely to comply. So it turns out to be eminently doable to find influentials almost all the time. So one of the earliest mechanisms for this was to look at prior criminal justice records. By the time you get to be an impact player, almost everybody has been on probation and parole. It's not universal, but it's pretty close to it. Probation records, parole records, probation officers, parole officers, things like pre-sentencing reports will frequently contain information that says this person is a good influence and these people are bad influences. We can look at, and again, you can read this for yourselves, but people who visit folks when they're locked up tend to be good influences in their life. It can be the other way around too, so you can't just take any of this for granted. But the experience is, for the most part, when somebody goes to the trouble of visiting somebody when they're inside, they're the right kind of people. And so on and so on and so on. So again, nothing magic about any of this. It's probably the last thing that we think of, but it does turn out to be true in practice that you can simply go to the guy and ask him. And there's actually quite a lot of experience with that. You just say, who you want to be part of this? And they will tell you. So the sort of folks who end up being influentials are exactly who we would think they would be. And the one thing I'd say about this is that we often assume that because somebody is acting out in an extreme fashion on the street and behaving extremely badly, that his family doesn't care. And we find in practice that that's really not right, and that what the family members will frequently say is, I've done everything I can, I'm at my wit's end, I'm terrified, but I just can't control him. But it does not mean that they don't care and won't try. And that even when family members have been part of the problem, and they frequently are, they can be just completely out of it for various reasons, or they can actually be promoting their criminality, that when you go to them and say your son, your grandson is at a turning point, and he is headed for prison, he's going to get killed, the likelihood of both of those things is frighteningly high. Will you work with us to stop this from happening? That even when family members have been part of the problem, they will more often than not say, yes, we will help you. So we've learned not to write off family too early on. So there turn out to be these 4 or so ways in which we think custom notifications can be routinized. And the first is, as good as the call-ins are, they can be strengthened by using the customs. So one is, if we do the work we usually do to populate the call-in. So we look at the groups, we look at the group members, we look at those on probation and parole. If we at the same time say, let's identify 1 or 2 impact players from each group, and if they're not on probation and parole and will not be coming to the call-in, let's saddle up and say beginning a week before and trying to finish not later than a week after the call-in, so we're bracketing the call-in. Let's get custom notifications out to all those impact players. And the idea there is that you have just dramatically increased the dosage of that signal around the call-in. And as good as the call-ins are, not everybody shows up, and that means that we can go find them or go find somebody else in their group and make sure that that group that they represent actually has gotten the message. And one of the first moves we made along these lines in Chicago was everybody who did not come to the first Chicago call-in was violated. They were mostly parolees, so that was easier than it would be for probationers. They were not violated for the rest of their sentence, but they were brought in for a couple of days at least. And Chris and his team organized a call-in in the Cook County Jail, and everybody was brought in as a literal captive audience, and the message was delivered to them there. So there are different ways that we can get this done. This one feels particularly powerful to me, and we think we are seeing this in practice, that if we know that there is a beef, we can figure out who the couple of people most likely to be driving it on each side are, and we can go out and speak to both of them, and we can say to each of them the usual messages: this is going to stop, we want to help you, etc. And we can say to them, and we're having exactly this conversation with the folks on the other side. So you don't get to hurt them, they don't get to hurt you, we're in charge, and this is going to stop. After an incident, and where there's any concern about retaliation, we can figure out where the retaliation is most likely to come from, and we can go say to them, it's a terrible thing that your friend's been hurt. We are on this. We're in charge. There will be no retaliation. And I'll stop saying this after this one last time, but we are seeing this be dramatically powerful out in the field. Once again, we don't need probable cause. We don't need reasonable suspicion. We only need to believe that we know enough about something that might happen to go want to try to head it off. And once again, for all kinds of reasons and in all kinds of ways, we frequently have that sense. Something's going to happen. This thing is likely to happen. And if the likelihood that that is real is above a pretty low threshold, and we're set up to routinely make these community contacts, we can simply go out and say, please don't. When we have a neighborhood outbreak, the experience nationally is that typically there are not more than a handful of individuals driving that. In the worst instances where we've tried systematically to audit that situation and say who's really behind this, it's typically from literally one or two to not more than a dozen or two core guys, even on an entire neighborhood basis. And that means we can go make contact with all of them or as many of them as we can reach. And we don't have a tremendous amount of experience with this nationally yet, but what we do have is, once again, it seems to work really well. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail. We will get you all the PowerPoint, but this is advanced enough now that the basic routine is becoming pretty clear. So law enforcement has the most intelligence. That sounded very funny. The law enforcement has the most intelligence about the street scene. It is going to have typically the sort of early warning about what's going on out there. It's getting the reports of homicides and shootings, and so it's going to have generally the most organized and systematic view of the street scene. So that means it has the capacity to recognize that there's a problem. It has the capacity to identify group members and impact players. It can do the custom legal assessment. It can prepare that document, and it can work with other partners to say, okay, we've got one. We've got to go make this happen and drive that process. Community members and people who can provide outreach and support can be part of this process. It can, in many instances, look at things like identification of impact players and say, yes, no, we have some other information of our own, so it can add value to that. It can be part of the actual delivery of the notification, and it can, and Chris will talk about this, do quite a lot of work in terms of documenting, tracking impact, and then, of course, actually delivering on any interest that is put forward about taking up the outreach and support options. So again, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. This is very, very, very much like what we're all doing in the call-ins already. And I think the more experience we have with this, both in the field and in some respects mapping what's going on back into the call-in process, the overarching theme that everybody involved in this is committed to keeping the impact player, the call-in participants, the group involved population, that this is about alive and free, as the catchphrase seems to be taking over. We have organized ourselves in an unprecedented way to keep you alive and out of prison, and that drives everything else. That we respect you, that we care about you, that we're going to give you, as Chris has started to say, or at least I've heard him say, we're about to give you $5,000 worth of free legal advice, that we want to help you, that we want to help your family, that we are absolutely committed to stopping the violence, and that is in considerable part because you are at extraordinary risk of victimization, and we are trying to keep you and your friends in one piece. That framing is dramatically successful. So same again as what we aim for in the call-ins, that this is not about a threat, it's about providing good information, that we're going to presume that the people we're talking to are rational and adult and can make good decisions, that this is in no way a get-out-of-jail-free card, that if required, law enforcement is going to do anything they need to that's legal, and that can be very, very powerful indeed, but that the point of all of this is to get compliance and to, if at all possible, avoid having to do so. And once again, just as in the call-in, the community moral voice and the offer of support and outreach is central. It is exactly as in the call-in. We care about you. We deeply support you. We are absolutely rejecting some of what you may be doing. We reject the violence, but we care about you. We want you in the community. We want you productive. And we are very serious about being committed to helping you. What is, of course, different here is that we can make it very, very specific to whatever this individual's particular circumstances are. And that means that with the right kind of homework, we can, both ahead of time and then in consultation with him and with his family, be very tailored about what they need. We can produce these custom legal assessments, which are individually aimed at this person. We can weave in information about what has happened to their friends and families, all that sort of thing. I'm going to turn this over to Chris now, because he has been, in fact, driving this in Chicago. And again, I don't think that it's terribly productive to actually walk through all of these points. We will again get this to you. Chris and others have got this down to a pretty fair science, but they have been doing this now for almost a year. And Chris, why don't you talk to us about how you've been doing that and what it's been like?
Sure. So we go out and when we put our partnership together, a couple things that I would reiterate that David touched on: the impact players, making sure you're getting to the impact players and knowing who those guys are, and the types of custom notifications. We've actually broken them down into 4 types, which is important as you start to look at who's going to go out to deliver the message with the partnership. We have what they call the heat list here in Chicago, which are those most likely to be the next victims, based on how many times they've been shot and all types of things that the Andrew Papachristos puts into his algorithm there. We have the commanders list, which I think is the most important of all the lists, which is the commander stating, these are the individuals who are driving my violence. They may not have extensive backgrounds. They may not be whatever the poster child, but these are the people driving the violence in my district. And then we have conflict zones, which is what we've been spending the majority of our time on now here in Chicago. Just to give people an idea of what we've done so far, since last July, beginning of last July, we've attempted 202 notifications in the city, of which we have been successful on 130 of them. You get bad addresses, those types of things. So intelligence is important, but you also have people who are locked up, and then people who run. You're not there to lock them up either. But the conflict zones are the ones that we're engaged in right now, which there's an ongoing conflict where you could be talking to someone, and as you're shaking their hand, they actually have gunshot residue on your hand. I mean, that's what we're engaged in right now here in Chicago. And then the follow-ups. After they've done a custom notification or you complete one, you need to follow up after a certain period of time. I mean, you determine with your partnership what that period of time would be. But just to let them know, that there's, if they haven't reached out for help, help is still available. But so that the message stays fresh for them. What I would say about the keys for successful messaging, number one, again, personnel. A lot of people want to do this. When you start doing this, you're going to see some success. If you do it right, you'll see success right away, and sometimes some significant success. We had one commander did 9 of these, and her violence all but went away for about 2 weeks. That was being driven by the 2 groups that we went to meet with. We met with 3 guys on either side of the conflict, and everything just quieted down. But you have to be careful that you're not trying to do 10 in the same area. We've done so many because we've spread those out over we have 22 districts in Chicago, 22 police districts, 2.5 million people altogether, and about 15 of our districts, 12 to 15, drive 80% of our violence, our gun violence in the city. So that's where we focus our efforts. You look at, as you go in, the keys I'd say is when you go in with your partnership, our approach is, especially because of the nature of what we're going into now, my advice and my counsel would be, number one, be careful. And that's simply because we don't know what we don't know when we knock on the door. As such, we have the community members kind of stand behind law enforcement. I've gone out in a vest at the commander's request on a handful of these. Because of the nature of the individuals that we're going to see. We're not going to visit some at-risk kids here. A kid who's, acting up, and, these are shooters. These are killers for the most part, on our part. We're going after the people who, in many instances they like for homicides, but drive that violence. They have no problem pulling a gun, or pulling a trigger rather. So be careful. We don't know what we don't know what we don't know when we go inside the door. Number 2, protect the message. Part of that gets back to personnel and protecting the message, making sure you got the right people there. When you get going and things start to pick up a little bit, I just fought off, and David helped me a little bit, and he saw, it gets sexy. We're face to face with the gang members who are pulling triggers, and some people want to be a part just so they can be a part of it. It's exciting. It's publicized. And you got to step away from that and make sure you got the right people, because you have to protect that message, and it can't get caught up with politics or anything else. And then the last 2 things, pay attention to the cues, I say. When you're talking with folks, I tell my folks, we are the guest of law enforcement when we go to these homes, especially with these conflict zones. We're just as equally as important as law enforcement. And we hold ourselves, we are 50-50 with law enforcement representing the community. However, we are their guests. They knock on the door. They announce their office. They let them know it's just information. We're not here to arrest anybody. We're not here to serve a warrant. If we were, we wouldn't have done more than knocked on the door and announced our office, and then we'd be in your living room. So we're just here to share some information because of some concerns we have. We don't call anybody a gang member, or a thug. We say, we understand that Joey is an active member in the community, and this is what's going on with the activity in the community right now. Then there's a handoff. The handoff goes to from law enforcement to the community, and there's an introduction when you get there, but then there's a reintroduction for services that can be provided. There's not a long discussion with law enforcement, never talking about the case or an open case or anything like that. Again, sharing information. From the community side, what we share is simply, we are appreciative of our law enforcement partners, reinforcing the legitimacy of our law enforcement partners, and saying that, they don't have to come out and do this. They're basically giving you their playbook, and they're coming out, and, but who does this? Who comes out before? We're trying to get ahead of things, not after someone's been locked up, not after, God forbid, you're dead or you're bleeding in the street out here. We're trying to avoid those things, but we want you to stand in your rightful place. We need you, we value you, and want you that message there. But also paying attention to the cues as to where to go with the messaging and whatnot, and then also who's there. After you're done tracking the impact, David mentioned tracking. That's critical. We have to be able to track how successful we were. The things we look at is how many notifications we attempt, how many are completed, how many of those people may have attended a call-in, outreach and support, how many reached out for support and what that percentage looks like, how many have been rearrested, how many have been shooting victims. We asked them when we talked to them, have you ever been shot? And one guy we talked to shot 6 times. On average, they've been shot 2 times at least, 1 to 2 times. The majority of them. Say that's why we're here. We don't want you to get shot. Your likelihood of being shot is up to 500 times more likely than anyone else in the neighborhood, and that makes you a moving target with anyone in your family that you walk around with. Any of your friends, your child, that stroller. You're pushing a stroller. They don't care about the stroller. That seems to sink in a little bit, especially when you get the influentials, the family members. What we say is that, we're respectful, we're firm, we're consistent. There's that risk of prosecution and death that's involved in the messaging. The keys of love and value for that individual, that he is part of the social fabric of the community, and we acknowledge that. The guarantees of accountability and help is going to be available if you want it, but the constant message of put down the guns, stop the killing. And even though it's an individual custom notification, we've found a greater impact when we do say on our way out the door, and while we're talking with them, tell your family, tell your friends, tell your associates. This message is for you individually, but share the message. Unity with all the stakeholders is critical. You can't go in there and, I've had some, I'm not turn to the police when it's the community's turn to talk and say, they don't look like us. Those types of comments. They say, I've had someone say, I don't like what they're trying to do to you. And that it undermines what we're trying to do. Same thing on the flip side with law enforcement. Just really respecting our partners and playing off of our partners. Because once you do it a couple times with a group, you start to be able to feed off of each other, kind of know where one another is going, and carry it a little bit better. But delivering the message, like David said, to the family members, I'm a coach, and I think that's critical. Oh, before I get there, professionalism in attire and message delivery. Just people being who they are, not trying to dumb down the message or sound more intelligent or sound street or, just be who you are when you deliver the message. That's what's respected, that in the authenticity there. I will mention attire, simply because we had a young lady at one point helping to deliver a message, and she looked like she was getting ready to go out to a club. And, the guys listened. They were attentive, I'm going to tell you that. But I don't know how much of them how much the message actually sunk in. So you live and you learn there. But we always say, professionalism in attire and when you deliver the message. The family member piece, I look at it as a father. If you want to do something for me or my wife, don't do something for me or for my wife. Do something for my kids. Something for my kids, you always have a seat at my table, and I start to listen a little bit differently. And you also have to acknowledge the fact that you're dealing with individuals who, for the most part of their life, the only time authorities have come and knocked on their door is to lock them up, or this is a negative experience. Now that you're coming and you're giving them a heads up, essentially, from a law enforcement perspective, but you're also bringing some assistance to them. And what you do at the end of the day is you are eliminating all excuses. And I even say point blank to them, there's no more excuses. You can't talk to me about being poor. You can't talk to me about being black. You can't talk to me about oppression. You can't talk to me about how hard it is. Yeah, I acknowledge all of those things. Yes, I do. But you can't say that you can't get a job and you can't move on and no one's here to help you, because here we are at your doorstep. Here's the business card. One officer even said at one point, he said, listen, he said to the guy, he pointed to my business card, and he said, that's your lottery ticket, and that cell phone number there is the winning number for the lottery. And he said, this is your opportunity. You know, they're at a crossroads. I talk to them a lot about being at that crossroads. But in and out, you're all together. It's a 10-minute conversation, really. Once you get a chance to start talking with the individual, you're talking about 10 minutes. The last thing I'll say there is, I already talked about the tracking. Limit the visits to a manageable number, and then keep your promises. Make sure you keep the promises. You know, the scenarios you'll come across is, don't try to chase them on the street just to find the guy and deliver the message to the guy. You know, go to the residence. There's so much power in going to the home. You know, they were at my house, not just the police. I mean, that's what they focus on up front. But, you know, we were somewhere yesterday, and we actually chased someone out to the suburbs to try to find this guy. And we caught him and his family and his mom and whatnot. And his mom was just overwhelmed by the fact that the police in Chicago had come to, you know, Stickney, Illinois, to give her kid a heads up. We've also added ATF in our customs for certain impact players. And the ATF, the agents don't say a word. They don't need to. They just get out of the car and they stand on the porch or they stand in the house, and there they are in their vest with their badge. And then when we talk about, you know, the spotlight that they're in, and then when it flips to the community side and we talk about we don't want them in that spotlight, we prefer them to be in another spotlight and be in the rightful place, it sinks in a little bit deeper. You know, plus you have, you know, we go two individuals from the community now for the conflict zones, because it's a conflict zone and because of the nature of what's going on. And you don't know, because you're not searching the home. There could be a cache of guns right there while you're talking to the individual. We've been in places where we know, you know, guys are running out of the house, guys are getting, you know, not, you know, in the closets, and I mean, so there's, you know, you have to be careful and play it as such. But like I said, we've done 130 of these successfully. Of the 130, 30% have reached out for help. Of the guys who've been rearrested, only one has been rearrested for a violent offense. He was caught last week with a gun, loaded gun, dead to rights. And of the 130, only 3 have been shot since we did a custom. I believe the number's about 40% were shot before, 50% were shot before a custom. Only 3 of the 130 have been shot since we've done the notification. Now, have they been rearrested? Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Have they been rearrested for a violent offense? Only the 1. You know, have they been shot? Yeah, they've been shot. And I think the numbers are higher, because initially we were relying on data that we had. But what we found is we just ask them when we're talking to them, have you been shot? And they tell you. Or the family member, has he been shot? Yeah, he's been shot. Scared the hell out of me. You know, we've had people open the door and say, is he dead? You know, we've had a half a dozen of those. Is he dead? You know, we had one mother turn to him and say, he knows I got an insurance policy on him. He knows I do, because he's stupid and I think he's going to die. You know, so you never know. But then you have, you know, at the end of the day, David's absolutely right. You know, there are some supportive families out there. Can they do anything with them? I don't know. As far as anecdotal stories, I will share, you know, as far as guys not knowing. You know, we ran into one guy, and we shared this with him, and he said, you know, I've only been arrested 6 times. He was only counting his gun and drug offenses. And then he said solicitation counts, gambling counts. You know, he had no idea, you know, but it was good because it reinforced, you know, the fact that basically we're giving you a heads up. You have no idea where you even stand in the legal system right now. And we're letting you know. So you understand the consequences if you choose to continue going down that road. We met with a group last week. We went out for a conflict that's going on in one of our districts on the south side of the city. Seven members of the group, and we met with the Black Mob, Black Pea Stones, and we met with 5 of the 7 members. Actually, we were supposed to meet with 3, but we caught 2 hanging out with the other guys in the house. Of the guys we met with, every single one of them has been shot in the last year. You know, some of them have been shot 3 times, some of them have been shot twice in the last year. So it's kind of like, yeah, you know, how's this going for you? You know, it's just, maybe you guys want to try something else. Like, you're clearly like the low guys on the totem pole here. They won't leave their houses, you know, rarely leave their houses. And when they leave, you know, they're leaving with a weapon. You know, again, I mentioned the guys running off. somebody at the back door, a trail car or something, just in case. The power of ATF. The one mother, her husband is in jail in the Bureau of Prisons. We didn't know that going in. All we knew going in is they expected it to be. This was yesterday. We did a custom out on the west side, and we're talking to this kid. It's the kid who supplies the guns for this particular conflict, and he's a millionaire. He got a $5 million lawsuit settlement. So he's the guy that they go to. He supplies all the weapons and all the drugs for this group. And the mother's his stepfather's in federal prison. And when she saw ATF and ATF came in the house, she didn't she just flipped the script completely from what they were accustomed with this kid growing up. They've been chasing this kid for 8 years now, since he was 16. But mom really kind of laid it out and said we're done with the guns. We're done with the guns. And then recently, last week, we caught a guy and talked with him in a north side district that you wouldn't even think guys were out there doing this stuff, but they are. And since we met with this guy, his group was two groups that were driving about 80% of the violence in the commander's district. We met with this guy. We talked with this guy, delivered the custom. He was very nervous. I'll tell you that. His hands were shaking and his chest was heaving because you don't know what else he may have done, I guess. But, obviously he's got, one guy said, I'm not coming to the house. Give the phone to my cousin and, let my cousin give them the information, and I'll call Millette after 9 o'clock tonight, because he said, I ain't coming there with 5 crowns. There were 5 officers there, including ATF and 2 community folks. But he said, he wasn't comfortable. Now it's fine. He got the information, he got the message, and we haven't had anything with those guys. But the guy on the north side, he was more shocked that he wasn't getting arrested. We gave him the information, offered to help, and since then he went out and negotiated a truce with the other group and said, this is, I'm not going this route right now. So things have calmed down. He's a known shooter there. They like him for about 5 homicides, I believe, that they haven't been able to prove up on him. But he's the guy that drives the violence for that area. And then the last one I'll share with you is, we met with a group on the west side, and the guy didn't want help, but he referred 7 associates to us, and we helped all 7. And that's the thing, the last point, the key with the personnel, your personnel has to be able to step up and produce. So whoever's doing the outreach and support and that community side, when these guys call, my wife will tell you, I got babies, mamas of gang leaders calling me at 11 o'clock at night, talking about we need housing, we're done with the shooting. I mean, that happened twice. But you got to be able to respond, and you got to be able to move quickly. And I tell them up front, I'm not promising you anything other than a group of people who will work their butts off to help you if you desire to move in the right direction. As a result, we've gotten partnerships with the city now. People see we're serious. We were able to employ 55 guys last summer, for 6 months actually, from June through December. Of that group, 10 are still working. 5 got other jobs. You never know what will come with it. But the key is stay focused on, we're here to drive down the violence. We're not here to get everybody jobs. We're not here to get everybody enrolled in school. If it happens, it's wonderful, and we'll offer that. Like I said, 1 out of 3 of this group. You get this group. This group's not really social service-oriented group, if you will. But we've gotten 1 out of 3 call us and ask for help. And more importantly, the violence. Only 3 guys out of 130 have been shot since we did a custom notification. So are they still engaged players? Absolutely. I have no doubt about it, except for a handful who I know what they're doing right now on the other side of things. But they're not engaging in gun violence. They're away from guns.
That's great, Chris. Thank you. So, comments, questions?
I have a question, David. This is Archie.
Hey, Archie.
How does this play when, let's just say, for example, we have a call in and the first homicide occurs, okay? And we want to reach out. We reach out to both parties. How does this play in with our message of we're still going to go after this first homicide? Am I making myself understood there?
Sure. So this fits in wherever you think it should or shouldn't. So my guess is that if your working group gets together and says, okay, this is our first homicide, this is our next group homicide, this is it, we're going, and we're focusing on, street group A, you probably wouldn't go notify street group A. You might go notify street group B because they're the victim side and you don't want them to retaliate. We've had some instances when Mike Eberhardt, who you met in our workshop in New Orleans, he's been piloting these historical federal cases in which all the evidence that goes into the conspiracy prosecution comes out of existing investigative and criminal history information. And because they are so sure that they are going to be able to go backward in time and produce this conspiracy case, he's told me about times in which they've identified the group because they're ultra-violent and they're going to use this technique to get them off the street. But he's gone to them and told them that we're doing this. Because they're going backward, they don't care whether they continue to commit crimes. They don't want to charge them for those. They're going to charge them on the basis of the old stuff. And they have, in effect, done a custom notification with them saying, everybody's watching you, you're just going to make things worse. So you can map this onto what you're doing in any way that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Archie?
Yeah, it certainly does.
Okay.
I got a question.
Go.
This is Deputy Chief Razumirsky from Bridgeport. I got a question for you.
Please.
Okay. So it seems like there are, unless I got it wrong, there are two kinds of custom notifications here, or at least two scenarios where I could see it something different. The one is where you have the luxury of time to do your due diligence and on identified players as to what their legal exposure is. Get together with the community members and do the custom notification. So that seems like something that could be done, with the luxury of time. But then there's the quelling of beef, okay, where something just jumps off and you want to react quickly. So is it in line to just do it from strictly the law enforcement end, or are these notifications, are they all have to be part of the, all the members have to be present to do them?
So let me speak to what we're seeing at the cutting edge nationally, because we're pretty convinced that this is what we want to move toward. And that is that once we get good at this, those two situations pretty much collapse into one situation. So when you have a partner like Chris and his team, or I don't think Chris said this, but they are training as we speak other community partners to play this role. So they have a pretty decent bench that they can draw on. And those people are available pretty much in real time. So they know what they're doing, they've been trained, they've been out there, and they're as available as the law enforcement team is. So you don't have to wait for them. And it turns out in practice, and we're seeing this in a number of jurisdictions, that you can put the custom legal notification together very quickly. You search the guy's record, you have somebody who understands what that means in practice, you put the paragraph or two together that talks about the exposure, and you really can go from we've got a need, in the morning shift to delivering the custom notification in the afternoon shift. So that's clearly possible, and we think it's the goal. In fact, we're pretty sure it's the goal. Now, in practice, that's going to take a little time to put together. And so, yes, until you're at that point, there is absolutely no reason that if you've got an emergency, you can't do it just with law enforcement. What we do feel really strongly about is that the custom legal assessment should be part of that process. And that can, in fact, be done quickly, and then it can be delivered by law enforcement personnel. What I'd also say is that if it's law enforcement only, you still want to deliver all of the messages. And the law enforcement personnel doing that work need to understand that they're not there to threaten. They do need to be every bit as respectful and supportive as if the community people were there, and they should be in a position to deliver the outreach and support opportunities as well.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, Deputy Chief, is that ideally you want to have that community member there simply from the standpoint of it reinforces the legitimacy of the law enforcement being there. And also one thing to watch for is we had a commander go out and do these on her own and just pass out flyers for community service. There's no way we could track that. And we don't know if they called an agency or now we're introducing additional agencies, that type of stuff. So tracking becomes a little more difficult there. But from the standpoint of police legitimacy and the legitimacy of the strategy, if you could get one or two people trained to go, we're in a little more of a bit of a unique situation here, because we're at the disposal we could go out whenever we need to go out. When you get the community members going out, that's a little bit different because you have people coming from jobs, those types of things to help deliver the message with you. And also the level of safety, like like you said, you're quelling a beef. You have to have particular people to go out there that can actually, navigate that in the neighborhood. So they know you're not a snitch. They know you're not there to, as a CI. They know that you are legitimately there representing the community and trying to give them some help if they desire it.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Is anybody else?
Great stuff. Thank you.
So I'll give this just another minute or two for anybody who wants to jump in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Sergeant Austin here in Hartford. I'm just curious, like you were speaking in terms of like conflicts that this may start up like just overnight, and we can get ahead of it. Maybe going out and taking some of these individuals and taking some of these community people with us. Now, here in our own unit, we're aware of certain guys that have, they've been the guys who've been the ones that's driving the violence. But like I said, they're not under any judicial supervision. So, and a few of them may even be juveniles. And I know we don't really deal with juveniles. However, there's some juveniles who are very influential guys. What I know, longevity is not usually is looking for adults, but is there anything that you have in place that deals with that component right there?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And so let me be very careful about this because I want to say three things. So one is that there is already a conversation going among the state level longevity staff, each of the 3 site coordinators and the Yale John Jay team about this question of intervening with juveniles. And there are state-specific legal issues that are very different from state to state, confidentiality rules and all that sort of thing. And I know that the longevity team is assessing Connecticut law with respect to juveniles and making sure that the strategy around juveniles out of longevity is going to be not only effective but both legal and effective. So we're working on this, and stay tuned. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we absolutely have national experience on this, and even before we really framed the custom notification idea, the way of dealing with one main way of dealing with juveniles was custom notifications, because what's turned out to be effective with juveniles is usually not bringing them into the standard call-in, because most cities don't do that, although some do. Most don't. As everybody on this call knows, there's relatively little in terms of legal consequences, especially serious ones, that can be brought to bear on juveniles. And so what's turned out to work is constructing interventions with the juveniles and their parents, sometimes collectively. So multiple juveniles from one group and their parents, sometimes juveniles from rival groups and their parents, and saying to primarily the parents, here's what your sons are up to, here's the history of the violence and the vendetta that they're involved in. We want to help you, we want to help them, and pretty soon they're not going to be juveniles, and here's what's happening to people just like them who are only a year or 2 older. They're in real trouble. And we've got a bunch of examples from that of that nationally. It's been very effective, and I think the longevity process is figuring out how to do the most effective version of things like that within Connecticut law. And Carl, if you're on, have I got that about right about the longevity process? Not sure Carl heard me, but that's okay. I'm sure that's basically right. So Hartford, does that tell you what you need to know?
It definitely touched on a few things that we have some issues with, because one of the things, and I'm sure it's probably in Bridgeport and New Haven. I mean, I can't say 100%, but I know that you do have some young minors, 16, 17, who are running with older guys, but are also very, very influential, and are actually some of the more aggressive shooters.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that they know they're juveniles.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I said, due to the fact that they know they're juveniles and they understand the system well. And you spoke about the component of speaking with their parents. However, a lot of the juveniles we're dealing with, we're running into parents who themselves are 29, 30, 31, 32 years old, 33 years old, and their level of maturity is almost right there with the children. And it's very difficult to, I mean, I know we're not into the whole social science part of it, but it just, it's when we talk to them about your son and your daughter, they're actually facilitating a lot of their behavior by allowing their children and their friends to do or have criminal activity right within their homes. In other words, if there's a place, a skip house, where the kids who don't go to school, they all can come out here and hang out. If they want to get drunk, they can all bring their alcohol and liquor to this house and drink it.
Yep.
They want to smoke weed, they can all come to this house. And this is the parent who will actually lead some of these kids out in the street and literally have fights or Facebook fights and lead them. And they wonder, why the kids are having such a hard time, with the police or with other things when we show up at their doorstep. So they're not.
That's unfortunately all pretty standard.
Yeah.
So let me just say again that our experience has pretty consistently been that even when that kind of chaos is what's going on, that sitting down with individuals and their families and saying, everybody's looking at this, we're not going to put up with it. There are things that will happen if it doesn't stop, and we want to work with you to help make it stop and avoid those consequences. It doesn't always work. None of this is perfect, but we've learned not to presume that because right now the family is that dysfunctional that they won't respond when they are put on that kind of notice. So it may still be worth a try. The other kind of custom notification that can be very effective in those circumstances, and even though we didn't call it a custom notification, we've actually been doing this for a very long time, is to go to the older offenders with whom the juveniles are involved and say to them, everybody knows what's going on, everybody knows that you're deploying this kid or that this kid is emulating you. He is part of your group. He may be a juvenile and there's nothing we can do to him, but you're not, and if this doesn't stop, we're going to call DEA and direct them at your activities, or something like that. And that has consistently been very effective. So even when they're juveniles, even if you can't mobilize your families, getting the older offenders to understand that they are going to somehow pay a price for this has consistently worked.
Oh, okay. We
Hi,
can definitely utilize some of those methods.
So anybody else?
Yes, this is Detective Harold Dimble from Bridgeport. Question I wanted to know, dealing with the housing projects and all these things about snitches, get stitches, when you think that it would be a bad idea to come with a uniform officer where once everybody sees it, they're going to think this guy is snitching. How will you handle that?
We have found it's just not an issue. These look different, they taste different. Word gets out really quickly what's happened, and this always comes up as an issue, but in practice we simply haven't seen it arise as one. And Chris, I know Chicago thought about this an enormous amount as you were getting ready to go. You want to comment on this?
Sure, Detective. We've never had an issue either with call-ins or with custom notifications. Part of it is because, again, I think the key is to get the right personnel and to protect the message. If you protect the message, you pay attention to the cues, you could do amazing things with these. By the time they're looking at law enforcement at the house, and then they're looking at this individual, it's almost like an altar call every time you go out. Choose heaven or hell here. We'll stop you if you make us. We'll help you if you so desire and you allow us to. But it's just we've been able to get the message right. But, you can literally see a change in body language, body posture, and the cues that go along with that, attentiveness, and whatnot as they go through. There's been some we've done some of these where they won't look at the police and they won't look them in the eye, but they'll shake your hand if you're a community member and you're there to offer them help, and they start to realize what's going on. Part of it also is every time you do this, especially when you start out, but we've been doing it for a year, and it's like throwing a flashbang into their living room. I mean, they're confused. They can't figure this thing out. What the hell are they doing here? Why are they at my house? Because, again, good intelligence. You go where they lay their head, and you look for those influentials. You know, the fiance. I don't say baby mama because I hope. You know, so fiance. You go to the fiance's house where they're when they're supposed to be there. You go to the grandmother's house, the mother's house. The majority of these guys live with their mothers. They're not living on their own, if you will. But you have that conversation in the presence of these other folks, and you get that legitimacy piece. When you have the right members and you're delivering the right message, the family members, that's a new lever that you haven't had before. Because they're like, yeah, you know what? You need to call this. You need to take, you know, they're trying to help you. They are giving you a heads up. You will run into homes where you know that, you know, look, the Dalai Lama or Jesus or Moses or whoever could go in and have dinner with them, and they'll go out and shoot somebody. And we all know it. You know, but the idea is you want them to begin to process, because most of this stuff is retaliatory, and as they begin to process things, they don't just jump out because they remember the visit that they had. You know, but we've never had a problem with, you know, people interpreting them as snitches or any. The last call-in we had, one of our community speakers drove 4 guys home. She recognized 2. You know, do I recommend that? No, I didn't know about it, and they talked to her on the way home. And they said, "Wow, we didn't know you roll like that. Is that for real? You know, could we really get help? You don't understand, Ma, what it's like." You know, and she had a conversation. So it is definitely a valid concern, but we found, I mean, 130 of them in the hottest homes in the city, and we haven't had an issue.
Thank you.
Hey, David?
Yeah.
This is Archie again. You know, and what we plan to do, and kind of, I guess, what Chris does, and is we plan to go. We've talked about going with our district manager, because he's really the face of that neighborhood as far as the police department's concerned. So it's a familiar face in the neighborhood to begin with, and a representative of the police department. So, you know, we plan on, you know, utilizing our district managers to go along and be that face of the department, that uniform presence and face of the department.
That sounds just right, and that is exactly how Chicago started. Literally with the district commander. The very first ones were done. And Chris, I think most of them still have been, yes?
I know Deputy Chief Schmitz, when he was the commander in 7, did some of these, but you know, since that time, and we do almost all of them now. We've kind of grown as we and gotten better, I think, and tweak it as we go. But every single one we do now is with the partnership with it's the commander and the community member.
Right.
And the reason it's the commander, it's because it sends a much more profound message, because you're saying this is a white shirt. Like, he could have sent, or she could have sent anyone to deliver this message, but it's that important to him or her that you hear what we're saying today.
Yep. And Archie, I didn't take you to mean that you were going to do it with the district commander alone, right? You're also going to...
No, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
I'm going to be there. In my absence, Lieutenant Vasquez would be there. So, you know, no, we're not doing it alone. I just thought that it would... My feeling was that it would be great to bring along the district manager, who is the uniform presence in that neighborhood,
yep.
Along, you know, to show that how important it is to us.
No, that's right, Archie. I mean, we go, the commander, along with the commander, is the district intelligence officer, who all the gang members know, because that's the person that, you know, manages and keeps track of all the gangs and the gang members. So then they know, you know, wow, they really are plugged in and looking at me. So that's absolutely right.
And Archie, you're also going to bring your community representative, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yep.
Not going to do this without.
Sounds just right.
You know, you got to understand, Chris. We're a lot smaller than you. So, you know, so. But as far as our district manager is that person, that one individual in the department that's in that neighborhood every day. So they're the ones that are most recognizable outside of the chief.
So, any other thoughts or questions, comments, anything? One last time, everybody. So it sounds like we're good.
Sorry, I'm going to try to get off the speakerphone. Maybe that's me that's feeding back. Can you guys hear me? Somebody say yes? Okay, good. So let's wrap this up. Longevity will continue to work with all of you on this. This is a priority for the project and the larger team. Just to say it again, we're seeing this have really dramatic impact nationally, so we want to make sure that all of you have this as a tool. We'll be working with Carl and each of the project managers and then the John JTA team. Any kind of questions, thoughts, suggestions, because as you can tell, this is all a work in progress. And as with every other part of this work, everybody who does it has contributions and innovates, and we need to hear about that, so make sure we do. And any last thoughts out of this or anything else that you're doing that come late, please let us know. We are very, very, very serious about this. And thanks, Michael, on my side for making this all happen. Thank you very much, Chris. That was terrific. Chris, you have any final thoughts?
No, I'll just say, everybody be careful. Again, you don't know what you don't know when you get there. Be optimistic. We had one guy out of 131 who didn't open the door. And that guy got shot 23 times the day after Christmas. We did catch up with him later. He refused help, all that type of stuff. But be optimistic and have fun. I mean, you're going to see some crazy stuff. I'll share those stories in person over a drink, but not over the phone.
Hey, Chris, I got to come back out there and have that drink with you.
You got to come out on a couple of customs with us. I'll take you to the neighborhoods, and I mean, we've had nudity, we've had all types of stuff.
Sounds good.
And on that note, I will call a halt. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Talk to you later.
Thank you, everyone.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.